Hey friends, what's up? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Tes of Masechta Ayruvin, Daf number 9. Alright, how you guys, everyone's excited for Daf number 9? Good. Okay, let's do an overview. Yeah, thank God I had a chance to do an overview today, which is amazing because, you know what, I've been doing these overviews now for like quite a while, and they've been so helpful for me. You know, just like after I've learned the daf, I then go over it and really conceptualize it and break it down in my head into its components and the different opinions and things. And it really just helps me so much for just like having clarity on everything. And I think that because I wasn't able to do an overview yesterday, like, I don't know, like kind of screwed up my whole day, I think. I think my whole day was just unclear because I didn't have a chance to clarify my thoughts before Babylon Talmud. So I'm really happy that I had an opportunity to do that today. Friends, overview. So at the beginning we're going to talk about like weird Korah. Well, not weird Korahs, they just are weird. And how lavud may or may not apply to that. And then we're going to talk about Rabbi Yochanan's opinion regarding can you carry in lechi zone. Right? When you get to the end of the mavuis and there's a lechi dartin, can you carry, you know, parallel maybe, I guess, perpendicular? Can you carry in that area where the lechi is? Or do you have to stop carrying before then? What about if you have a mavui that has a whole bunch of lechis, and these lechis are like kind of close to each other, but kind of not? Maybe it's lavud, maybe it isn't lavud. What do we do? And then what happens if you have a lechi that is, you can see it from the outside but not from the inside? Kind of similar, and we're going to bring up again our favorite sugya about, well, not exactly our favorite sugya, but remember like when we had that mavui that opened up to that chutzner, and you can kind of see the wall from the chutzner but not from the mavui. And then we brought like a Mishnah which talked about like a small chutzner that opens up to a big chutzner. We're going to get back into that. So that's kind of a highlight for everybody. Let's get started on Daf Ches Amud Beis all the way at the bottom. So Rava had said at the end of the day yesterday that in our example of this Korah that is outside of the mavui on these pegs, you can actually see it on 8b3 in the one diagram that's on the page. There's this mavui, and then in the Rosh Hashanah there are like these two pegs that are sticking out on the walls, and then you take your Korah and you rest it on these pegs, and one side of the Korah is flush against the end of the mavui. So Rava had said that there's no way, no how that mavui is ever going to be acceptable because the Korah has to be above the mavui, right? As it says, Ba'inan Korah al gabi mavui veleko. You need the Korah to actually be above the mavui. Now, when it's just outside the mavui on these pegs, it's not above the mavui. So now we're going to question that line of reasoning. Eis ve'Rav Ada bar Masna l'Rava. So Rav Ada bar Masna asks a kasha to Rava. We're at Ches Amud Beis on the very last line. Haisu koraso mishucha otluya. Now we're already on Tes Amud Aleph. Pachas mishlosha in tzarich lavi korah acheres. Shlosha tzarich lavi korah acheres. Reb Shimon Gamliel Omer pachas me'arba in tzarich lavi korah acheres. Arba tzarich lavi korah acheres. What the heck did I just read? So let's start again. Haisu koraso mishucha otluya. So if you add a korah on a mavui, and this korah was either mishucha or tluya, we're going to have to define what mishucha is and what tluya is. We're saying that if this Korah was either Meshucha or Tluya, Pachas Mishlosha Ein Sarich Lavi Korah Acheres. So if it is Meshucha or Tluya less than 3 Tvachim from the walls of the Mavui, well then we could say Lavud, and you don't need to construct a new Korah, a new kosher Korah, because this one itself is kosher. Shlosha Tzarich Lavi Korah Acheres. However, if this Korah was Meshucha or Tluya 3 Tvachim or more, well, then it won't work, and you got to construct a new kosher Korah. Fine. Reb Shimon Gamliel Omer, Pachos me'arba ein tzarich lavi korah acheres, arba tzarich lavi korah acheres. Simply, Reb Shimon Gamliel argues with the position that we've generally always accepted, which is that lavud is, meaning generally we assume that lavud is 3 Tvachim. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says it's 4. Did this come up in Masechta Shabbos? I feel like maybe it sounds familiar from like maybe Daf Kuf of Masechta Shabbos, but I have to look it up. Al Kopanim, we see that it's a machlokas between the Rabbanon, which is the opinion that we generally accept, and we assume that lavud is 3 tfachim. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel apparently argues and says that lavud is 4 tfachim. But either way, kilu, whether you say it's, so according to the Rabbanon, if this korah is meshucha or tluya, 3 tfachim, well, less than 3 tfachim, so it will be kosher. More than 3 tfachim, it won't be kosher because we can't say lavud. According to Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, it would be the same thing, just instead of 3, it's 4. So as long as it's mashuch or talui less than 4 tfachim, we could say lavud, and it's kosher. If it's more than 4 tfachim, then we can't say lavud, and it is not kosher. Fine. Now, here's the part that we've all been waiting for. What is meshucha and what is tluya? My love, meshucha mi bachutz utluya mi bifnim. So what does it mean? So mistama, what it means is that meshucha is when the korah is outside of the mavui, exactly like our case, our diagram on 8b3, when you have, right, that Rava was talking about, when you have the 2 pegs on the outside, and you have the mavui resting on the pegs, and we're saying what? As long as the korah is within 3 tfachim of the wall, or 4 if you're Reb Shimon Gamliel, but let's just stick to the Rabbanan who say 3. As long as the korah is within 3 tfachim of the wall, it's kosher. So that's the kasha on Rava. Kilu, how could Rava say that the korah has to mamish be above the mavui if we have this brisa that's saying that even if it's meshucha, even if the korah is meshucha, which we're assuming right now means that even if the korah is outside of the mavui resting on pegs, as long as the korah is within 3 tfachim of the mavui, well then it's acceptable. And then what would be the example of tluya? Tluya mi bifnim. And tluya is on the inside. And what does that mean? So that example is on diagram 9A1 at the top left. So you could see that the korah actually doesn't reach either of the walls. So meaning in this example, the korah is in between the 2 walls, but it doesn't reach the 2 walls. It's too short. It's on some kind of a peg, on some kind of a pedestal that's holding it up, but it doesn't actually reach either wall. And what tluya is we're saying that as long as the both ends reach within 3 tfachim of the wall, well then we could say lavud. If it's more than 3 tfachim away from the wall, we can no longer say lavud. But the kasha on Rava is, as we said, that by meshucha, we're saying that the korah is outside of the mavui, and we say as long as it's within 3 tfachim of the mavui, it's acceptable. That is a kasha on Rava, who says that the korah must be above the mavui, friends. Lo, the Gemara says not true. That is not what meshucha and tluya means. Idi v'idi mi bifnim. Rather, both meshucha and tluya are talking about where the korah is covering the mavui, is on top of the mavui. Meshucha meruach achas utluya mishtei ruches. So what meshucha means, so our definition of tluya remains the same. That tluya, it's when the ends of the korah do not reach either wall, like in the diagram on the top left of 9A1. What meshucha is the example, the second example on the left column on 9A1, which is where the korah juts in from the side of the mavui, and it covers the mavui, but not the entire way. It doesn't reach all the way to the second wall of the mavui. And what we're saying is as long as it reaches within 3 tfachim of the other wall, we could say lavud, and we could consider it that the mavui has a proper korah, shalom al Yisrael. Right, so meshucha miruach achas, meshucha is when the korah is coming in from one end but doesn't quite make it all the way to the other end. Utluya mishtei ruches, and what tluya is when the korah reaches neither end. And we're saying that as long as it's within 3 tfachim, we could say lavud in both cases. Ma'udetema may have thought miruach achas aminan lavud, that we might only say lavud in the case of meshucha, when we have to say lavud only for one gap, for one side, mishtei ruches lo aminan lavud. But if there was a gap on both sides, on either side of the korah, such as in the case of tluya, I might think that we wouldn't say lavud anymore. You can't double lavud. So kamash malan, that you can double lavud. However, there is no nafkamina for Rava, right? Because in both cases, the korah is in fact above the mavui, and that would be consistent with Rava, who requires that the korah be above the mavui. Rav Ashi Amar, Rav Ashi gives his own interpretation of what meshucha and tluya is. Meshucha vihi tluya. So it's not an either or, it's lemaisa of both. Ve'echi dami kagon shenatz shtei yisedis akumes al shnei kos lemavui shem begovan gimel v'em be'akmumisan gimel. Friends, look at the diagram. So look at the diagram on Daf 9a1 on the right side. What you could see these inverted L kind of bracket things. Is that what they're called? These like L-y kind of things. So what happens is you could see that it's raised above the wall of the mavui, a shtickle, and then it also goes into the width of the mavui, a shtickle. And then on top of this L thingy is your korah thingy. And then, so the point is that it's neither resting on the mavui, nor on the walls of the mavui, nor is it long enough to reach the walls of the mavui. Right? So tluya is the fact that it doesn't reach either end of the mavui, of the walls, and it's meshucha in that it's like not resting on the walls, it's like raised above it. That is what we're talking about. So you need to do two things over here. Number one is you need to extend the length of the korah so that it reaches either wall of the mavui. The other thing that we need to do is we have to lower down the korah so that it's resting on, we have to imaginatively, whatever, like do both things. Extend the korah and lower the korah. Okay, so let's read this inside. So Rav Ashi Amar meshucha vihi tluya. So it's talking about it's both meshucha and tluya. How is this? Such as you put these two L bracket thingies on the walls of the mavui. Shein begovan gimel, that the height of the L is less than 3. Vein be'akmumisan gimel, and the sort of width of the L is also less than 3. So, ma'uditema o lavud aminan o chavut aminan. I may have thought to say, look, we can either say lavud, which of course is like, extending things horizontally, or we could say chavut, which is to lower it down, right? So I might think that we could say either we could make the korah wider, or we could say let's lower it down to be resting on the walls. But lavud v'chavut lo aminan, but we're not going to make to imaginarily, I'm just going to pretend like that's a thing, because I don't have another option right now. So we're just going to assume that we can imaginarily, let's talk a nice word, imaginarily. So we're just going to assume that you can both imaginarily make this korah wider and also imaginarily pretend like it's lowered onto this wider korah is lowered onto the walls of the mavui kamash malan. So those are two ways to understand mashuch and talui, right? Fine, but both of them are talking about where it's like inside the mavui. Neither one is a kasha for Rava. Let's go weiter, friends. Tani Reb Zakkai kame de Reb Yochanan. So Reb Zakkai taught in front of Reb Yochanan. What did he teach? Ben l'chayayim v'tachas hakora nidon kekarmelis. So both, when it comes to between the lechis, between the lechi really, right? So if you have a mavui, and there's a lechi at the end of the mavui, so he says that you're not allowed to carry in the area beside the lechi, because it's treated like a karmelis, and of course you can't transfer anything from a Rosh Hashanah to a karmelis. V'sachas hakora nidon kekarmelis, as well as under the korah is also considered like a karmelis. So Reb Zakkai was allegedly quoting a brisa that says that you are unable to carry in the area next to the lechi or in the area beneath the korah, because they're both treated like a karmelis. So Rabbi Yochanan says, hey, Reb Zakkai, go teach your fake little brises somewhere else. Meaning, because again, these brises were taught by heart, and sometimes people made mistakes when they were teaching them. So Reb Zakkai was teaching this brise in front of Rabbi Yochanan, and he was alleging that you're not allowed to carry beside the lechi or beneath the korah. Rabbi Yochanan said, that is not an accurate brisa, go teach it somewhere else, not here. So Abaye wants to argue that when Rabbi Yochanan kicked out Reb Zakkai and said, go teach your funny things elsewhere, well, that was only regarding under the korah. Meaning, Reb Zakkai said that you're not allowed to carry under the korah. And Rabbi Yochanan said, what are you talking about? Of course you're allowed to carry under the korah. However, argues Abaye, Rabbi Yochanan would agree that you're not allowed to carry besides the lechi. V'Rava Amar ben lechim nami mutter. Whereas Rava argues that Rabbi Yochanan would have no problem carrying beside the lechi either, and therefore he kicked out Reb Zakkai because he completely disagreed with Reb Zakkai's brisa, or alleged brisa. And Rava argues that Rabbi Yochanan's opinion was that you're allowed to carry both under the korah as well as beside the lechi. Amar Rava mina minala, and says Rava, how do I know that Rabbi Yochanan's opinion is that you would be allowed to carry beside the lechi? The Chi'asur Rav Dimi Amar Rabbi Yochanan, because when Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, he said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that Makom she'ein bo arba al arba mutar livnei rishus harabim v'livnei rishus hayachid l'kasef olav. So let's say you have a rishus hayachid, and outside of the rishus hayachid is a rishus harabim, and between the rishus hayachid and the rishus harabim there is an area that is less than 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim, i.e., it's a makom p'tur. Anything that is not, as Rashi points out, I'm in the Rashi, makom she'en bo dalad adalad, however v'leka makom chashuv, because it's not 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim, it's not significant, lav rishus ba'am penavsheu, it's not its own rishus, uvatel lahachu lahachav anu makom p'tur. And therefore it's batal to both. It's batal both to the Rishus HaYachid and to the Rishus HaRabim, and it's a makom p'tur. So Rabbi Yochanan, right, so Rav Dimi, when he came, he quoted Rabbi Yochanan as saying that if you have this area in between a Rishus HaYachid and a Rishus HaRabim, and this little area is less than 4 tfachim, okay, and it's a makom p'tur, so we say that the Rishus HaYachid and the Rishus HaRabim, they can both put things in this makom p'tur, as long as they don't use it as a hack to do hotza'ah and achnasa, right? You shouldn't have the people in the Rishus HaRabim putting something in the makom p'tur and then having people in the Rishus HaYachid taking it from the makom p'tur and bringing it inside. Do not do that. But as long as you're not going to abuse the system, both the people in the Rishus HaYachid and the people in the Rishus HaRabim are able to put stuff into this makom p'tur. So what do we see? So if we apply this to the mavui and say that this area that is next to the lechi, that, lechi doesn't, it doesn't even have to be a tefach. Lechi can be very, very thin. So this area should be similar to the area of Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan said that when you have this area that's less than 4 tfachim, it's batal to both the Rishus HaYachid and to the Rishus HaRabim. So certainly here as well, when you have this area next to the lechi, it should be batal to the mavui, and you should be allowed to carry beside the lechi. That is Rabbi Yochanan's, that is Rava's argument to say that Rabbi Yochanan must hold that you can carry beside the lechi. Abaye would argue and say that's not a good proof. Over there, what in the case that Rabbi Yochanan is talking about, where you had this area that was less than 4 tfachim, and we say that both the Rishus HaYachid and the Rishus HaRabim, people could put stuff there, that was 3 tfachim at least off the ground. And because it was 3 tfachim off the ground, it was obvious that this is its own unique area. And that's why people could put stuff on it. However, if it wasn't elevated at all, if it was just, in the ground, such as over here, the area next to the lechi, it's not elevated whatsoever, and therefore it's not clear, if you can carry there, you might end up carrying in Rishus HaRabim. So therefore, Abaye is going to argue that Rabbi Yochanan would not say, or how about this, let's do it in a positive way, Rabbi Yochanan would say that you would not be allowed to carry next to the lechi. Amar Abaye mina aminallah, Now Abaye now goes and gives his proof for why Rabbi Yochanan would say that you're not allowed to carry next to the lechi. Rav Chama bar Gurya Amar Rav, because Rav Chama bar Gurya says the name of Rav, and the assumption is that if Rav held this way, then Rabbi Yochanan, there's no reason why Rabbi Yochanan would disagree. What's this talking about, Chevra? So what do you think we have to do? Gotta look at the diagram. So if you look at the diagram on 9A2, there's only one diagram on 9A2. That's the bottom right. That is what we're talking about. There's a mavui. Now that mavui, at its entrance, right, where it hits the Rishus HaRabim, there's like kind of a wall area on either side of it. And that's its lechi, right? Basically, there's some wall sticking out on either side, and that wall sticking out is enough to be a good lechi. Now, we're saying that, however, if you want to carry in the area between these two walls, i.e. in the area between the lechi, did this Gemara come up in Daf Shabbos, and Daf Tes Amud Aleph? Yep, it did. Anyways, so in order to carry between the between these, in the area between the two lechis, so you'd have to put up a separate lechi. So what do we see? Here we see pretty clearly that you have these two walls that are jutting out. These walls are the lechi for the mavui, and we're saying that if you want to carry between them, you have to add a separate lechi, i.e., by default, you would not be able to carry beside the lechi. So Abai says, no, isn't that pretty clear that you're not allowed to carry next to a lechi? What do you guys think? So let's read that again. Amar Abaye, how do I know that Rabbi Yochanan would say that you're not allowed to carry next to the lechi? Because Rav Chama bar Gurya says in the name of Rav that when you have this setup where you have these two walls sticking into the mavui, and those walls serve as the lechi, and we're saying that if you want to be able to carry between those walls, you have to add a separate lechi in order to carry there, which means that by default you can't carry there. Well, there you have it. You can't carry next to the lechi. But maybe you'll argue, right? So Abaye kind of preempts your fancy kasha. Well, maybe you'll say that that's only because these two walls have a thickness of 4 tfachim, which makes it their own rishus, which makes it a karmelis, and that's why you can't carry there. But Rav Chanan by Rava says in the name of Rav that actually, when we say that you're not allowed to carry dartin, it means even if there is not a width of 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim. And therefore what, Chevra? Therefore we see that this area beside the lechi, you're not allowed to carry in, even if it's less than 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim, and therefore, bringing it back to our case, when you have a mavui, and at the end of the mavui there's pashat a lechi, so you can't carry beside the lechi, and the assumption is that if Rav holds that, then there's no reason to assume that Rabbi Yochanan would disagree. So Rava answers has an interesting response. Hasam de pasuach lekarmelis. Rava responds and says that case with those two kind of the walls sticking out on either side of the mavui, into the mavui, where we say that you're not allowed to carry in the area between those two walls, i.e. in this lechi area. Rava gives a very interesting answer. Do you know why you were not allowed to carry in the area between those lechis? Because Rava says really you should be able to carry in the area between those lechis. That's Rava's opinion. You can carry in the area next to the lechi. So how come in this case you weren't, when you have these two walls jutting into the width of the mavui? The answer is because this mavui was not opening up into Rishus HaRabim. This mavui was opening up into a karmelis, which is, a Rishus D'Rabbanan. And because this mavui was opening up into a karmelis, that is why you were not allowed to carry next to the lechi. However, the implication being that if the mavui would open up into Rishus HaRabim, well then you would be able to carry next to the lechi, and that is why Rava generally says you're allowed to carry next to a lechi, because in general We're talking about a mavi that opens up into Rishus Harabim. And the Gemara asks the obvious question, Aval Rishus Harabim mai shari? This makes no darn sense. When you have a mavui that opens up into a karmelis, which is only a Rishus Dirabanan, mida oraisa meikar adin, a karmelis is really just a makom p'tur, right? Mida oraisa, there are two things. Mida oraisa, there's Rishus Hayachid, there's Rishus Harabim. That's it. Everything else is pater. However, the Chacham created karmelis for things that aren't Rishus Hayachid and aren't Rishus Harabim. Now, how does it make any darn sense to say that when the mavui opens up into a karmelis, which is a Rishus Dirabanan, it's more strict in that you're not allowed to carry next to the lechi, but if the mavui opens up into Rishus Harabim, which if you carry between the mavui, which is a Rishus Hayachid, and the Rishus Harabim, your mamash can be over on an Isser D'Oraisa. There, we're more lenient, and we say that you're allowed to carry in the area next to the lechi. Friends, that doesn't make any sense, right? So look what the Gemara says. Yitziva ba'ara v'giyura b'shmei shmaya? Do we have like the residents on the ground and the aliens in the high heavens? Can anybody explain that to me? Basically, it's some kind of phrase that means like, are you crazy? I guess like, the aliens are in the better place. I don't know. No, so that's the Gemara's kasha, right? So Rav wants to say that Abai, you're asking a good kasha. We do, right? Rav is saying that you're not allowed to carry next to the lechi. And that does seem to be a decent proof. But Rav responds and he says, yeah, the only reason why you're not allowed to carry next to the lechi over there is because it opens up into a karmelis. To which we said, why does that make any sense? Why is a karmelis more strict than a Rishus Harabim? The Gemara answers, a karmelis is going to be more strict than a Rishus Harabim in this case, because matzah min as mino v'neor. A type found a similar type and woke up. What the heck does that mean? It means that because this makom p'tur is a makom p'tur, and a karmelis me'ikar adin is a makom p'tur, so therefore it's almost like a magnet. This little makom p'tur between between this wall that's jutting into the width of the mavui, in Rav's case. So this makom p'tur area, kind of like a magnet, gets connected to this karmelis, which also meikar adin is a makom p'tur, and therefore it becomes tafel, it becomes batel to the karmelis, and therefore carrying from the mavui into this makom p'tur between these two walls would ke'ilu be carrying from a Rishus Hayachid into a karmelis. However, if the mavui opens up into a Rishus Harabim, well then the mavui is a Rishus Hayachid, then outside is a Rishus Harabim, the place in between is a makom p'tur. So, it'll become equally batel to the Rishus Hayachid and to Rishus Harabim, and you can carry in there as long as you don't take it out from one Rishus to the other. That's the machlokas between Abaye and Rava in terms of can you carry next to the lechi. Abaye wants to argue, that Rabbi Yochanan would say you cannot. Rava wants to argue that Rabbi Yochanan would say that you can. Amalei Rav Huna brei the Rabbi Yoshua le Rava. Now Rav Huna brei the Rabbi Yoshua says to Rava, Ve'ad lo tizbara devein lechi and aser. 1 second, Rava, do you really hold that? Do you really hold that according to Rabbi Yochanan, you would be allowed to carry next to the lechi? Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Okay, friends, look at a diagram. Diagram on 9A3. At the bottom right, you can see that. Here's your mavui, regular mavui. What's different about this mavui is that you have those 4 lechis all the way at the end. Now those 4 lechis are positioned less than 4 tfachim from each other. And we're saying, in the name, Rabbi Yochanan is saying, Banu l'machlokas of Shimon Gamliel v'Rabbanan. We have now gotten to the machlokas between Rabbi Shimon Gamliel and the Rabbanan. We saw this machlokas at the top of the page. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says that lavud is, we say lavud up to 4 tfachim. The Rabbanan, which is generally the position that we assume, is that we say lavud up to 3 tfachim. Now, what's going on in this case is that you have these different lechis, and they are positioned less than 4 tfachim, but more than 3 tfachim from each other. And Rabbi Yochanan says that we have arrived at the machlokas between Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel and the Chachamim. That's all he says. He doesn't explain more than that. He doesn't exactly explain what the nafkamina is between Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel and the Chachamim. So what Rabbi Huna Brei Rabbi Yeshua wants to argue the nafkamina is that the Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel the Amar Aminon Lavud. So according to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, who would say that up to 4 tfachim we say lavud, and therefore we can assume that all of these lechis are attached to each other, are connected to each other. Mishtamish archudo apnimi shalechi apnimi. So that means that you can use the mavui, you can carry the mavui until you get to the innermost lechi. Once you get to the innermost lechi, then you have to stop. You can't carry there anymore because the innermost lechi is connected to all the other lechis, and it's just one big long lechi, and you're not allowed to carry next to the lechi. L'Rabbanan de Amrei lo amrinan lavud, and according to the Rabbanan who say that we would not consider this lavud because there's more than 3 tfachim of space between each lechi. Mishtamish archudu apnimi shel chitzon. So you can continue using the mavui all the way up to the outermost lechi, i.e. the one that's closest to Rishus HaRabim. Once you get to that one, well, that's the lechi for the mavui, and you can't carry next to the lechi. But all the other lechis are more than 3 tfachim away, and therefore those aren't actually the lechis for the mavui, and you can continue to carry over there. But the whole point is that everyone agrees that you're not allowed to carry next to the lechi, beside the lechi. The question is, how big is this lechi? Reb Shimon ben Gamliel would say that you would say lavud, therefore it's one big lechi, and therefore once you get to the beginning of the first lechi, you gotta stop carrying. Whereas the Chachamim say, no, there's too much space between the lechis, and there's only one lechi for this, only one of them serves as the lechi for the mavui, and you can continue to carry until you get to the outermost lechi in the mavui. That is how Reb Huna Brei Rabbi Yeshua wants to understand this statement of Rabbi Yochanan. So based on that, it would be clear, according to Reb Huna Brei Rabbi Yeshua, that Rabbi Yochanan would hold that you're not allowed to carry next to the lechi. Rava makes the same argument as he did to Abaye earlier, that case with all these lechis is talking about where the mavui is open to a carmelis, and that is why you're not allowed to carry next to the lechi. But what, if the mavui was open to Rishus HaRabim, you'd be allowed to carry next to the lechi? What, do we have the residents living on the land and the aliens living in the high heavens? Yes, Matzaminas Mino V'Neor, for the same reason as we said before, that when the mavui opens up to a carmelis, well then like a magnet, it latches onto the area next to the lechi, this makom ptur, and this area next to the lechi becomes a carmelis, and you cannot carry beside it. But if it opened up into Rishus HaRabim, then you would be able to carry beside the lechi. Rav Ashi gives a different explanation to this statement of Rabbi Yochanan with these different lechis that are separated by more than 3 but less than 4 tfachim. Rav Ashi Amar, so again, in Rabbi Yochanan's statement, he doesn't say what the nafkamina is between Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel and the Chachamim. He just says that there is a nafkamina between Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel and the Chachamim. So Rav Ashi Amar Kegon She'etzafu Belechim Pachis me'arba b'meshech arba amis. Interesting. So Rav Ashi says that we're talking about these lechis that were less than 3, that were less than 4 tfachim away from each other, but more than 3, over the course of 4 amis, right? Meaning from where the first lechi started and the last lechi ended, it's 4 amis. Now, according to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, it says that this would be considered lavud, and it would be considered like all of these lechis are connected together, and you have this solid 4 ama lechi. Havele mavui v'tzarich lechi acher latiro. So, according to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, these lechis that are connected to each other for the course of 4 amis, well, they basically become their own mavui, right? A mavui, at least according to Abaye, mavui has a depth of 4 amis, and therefore, when all of these lechis are considered connected to each other over the course of 4 amis, well, this is no longer a lechi, it's a mavui, right? Meaning, you had a mavui. You said, okay, I want to carry the mavui, let me add a lechi. You then, instead of adding just a normal lechi, you add like a whole bunch of lechis spread out within 4 tefachim of each other over the course of 4 amis, and you say, great, now I have a very fancy lechi. Actually, you don't have anything at all. All you did was you just constructed another mavui, but you don't have a lechi, and therefore, in that case, according to Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, you're going to have to actually add a new lechi in order to be able to carry next to this new mavui that you can, right, in this new mavui that you constructed. Now, according to the Rabbanan, who say that we don't say lavud, well then lo tzarich lechi acher latira. Well then you're all good. Then you're all good because you don't have this 4 amma lechi thing. You don't have a mavui, right? It's fine. The first lechi over there is enough to be matir the mavui. Now that would be the nafkamina between Reb Shimon ben Gamliel and the Chachamim. That so when Rabbi Yochanan is talking about when you have these lechis that are spread out from each other, and there's an nafkamina between Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel and the Chachamim, it's that the nafkamina is, do we consider these lechis to join together and make a separate mavui, which would require a new lechi in order for you to carry in this new mavui, or do we say no, there's no such new mavui because there's no lavud between these things? But in terms of like, what would Rabbi Yochanan say about carrying next to a lechi? Sure, carry next to the lechi. What's the big deal? Now, friends, you ready for this? So, the assumption is that when you build a lechi, okay, it's not going to be completely flush against the outer wall of the mavui, i.e., it's not going to be completely flush against the Rishus HaRabim. It's going to stick out a little bit, okay? So now, friends, even according to Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, okay, who says that these lechis that are next to each other within 4 tefachim, they're all considered connected, and over the course of 4 amis, assuming like Reb Ashi, so we say it's its own mavui, and therefore you need a new lechi to allow you to carry in this new mavui. The Gemara asks a kasha. The Gemara wants to know, but lechis in general, they stick out a shtickle. And if it's sticking out a shtickle, well then it would be near mi b'chutz. It would be, near mi b'chutz, what's it called? V'shavim mi b'fnim. Basically, what we would have is you would be able to see this lechi, this outer lechi, from outside the mavui in the Rishus HaRabim. Now on the inside, because they're all connected, you wouldn't be able to notice because it's all just flush, it's just one wall. From the outside, you'd be able to see, if you're outside the mavui, you'd be able to see that this lechi sticks out a shtickle. So why don't we just say that the lechi basically is its own lechi, right? Ki'ilu, we had said that when you have these lechis next to each other, and if we say lavud, so then it's its own mavui, now you have to add a new lechi. But why don't we just say that these lechis that we're saying are connected and make its own mavui, paters itself, it's its own lechi because it's sticking out, and therefore people notice it as its own lechi. So why do I need to add a new lechi? So the Gemara asks, Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, lehavik ner mi b'chutz v'shavim mi b'fnim. According to Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, why do we have to add a new lechi to this lavud mavui? Why don't we just say that because it's sticking out into Rishus HaRabim shtickle, it's its own lechi? So midi utaima el Reb Yochanan. Well, the Gemara says, yeah, but Reb Shimon ben Gamliel was in the context of a statement of Reb Yochanan, and Reb Yochanan doesn't hold of nir mi b'chutz v'shavim mi b'fnim. Hakiyasa Ravin Am Reb Yochanan nir mi b'chutz v'shavim mi b'fnim eino nidon mishum lechi. That when Ravin came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, he quoted Reb Yochanan as saying that when you have this lechi that's sticking out outside, but from the inside of the mavui, you can't tell that there's a lechi, well then it doesn't work. And since in this case, we just have like these 4 lechis next to each other, all in a straight line, you can't tell from within this mavui that any of it sticks out into Rishus HaRabim, and therefore, according to Rabbi Yochanan, it wouldn't be a good lechi, and that's why, according to Shimon ben Gamliel, you would need a separate lechi to be matir this lavud mavui. Itmar, it was stated, Nir mi b'fnim v'shavim mi b'chutz. So if you have a lechi that you could see from the inside of the mavui, but you can't see it from the outside of the mavui. So that's basically just like a standard lechi, I think. So nidon mishum lechi. So it's a good lechi. Now, nir mibachutz v'shav mibifnim, but if you could see it from the outside, but you don't see it from the inside, well then it's machlokas. Reb Chia v'Reb Shimon b'Rebbe. So machlokas between Reb Chia and Reb Shimon b'Rebbe. Chad Amar nidon mishum lechi v'chad Amar nidon mishum I lost something. Chad Amar nidon mishum lechi v'chad Amar eino nidon mishum lechi. Yeah, that makes sense. One of them says that it's a good lechi. One of them says it's not a good lechi. So now let's just take a look at this quickly. You could see a few different examples of what this could be on 9b1 on the bottom right. So, all those are examples of basically if you're walking in the mavui, you have no clue that this lechi exists. You can only see it from the Rosh Hashanah. So we have machlokas between Reb Chia and Reb Shimon b'Rebbe about, one of them says that it's a good lechi, one of them says it is a bad lechi. Okay? Tistaim de Reb Chia u de Amar nidon mishum lechi. So the Gemara wants to say that we could make a compelling argument to say that it's Reb Chia who says that it would be the good lechi. The Tani Reb Chia, the Reb Chia taught kosel shetzido echad kanus mechavero. So if you have a wall of a mavui, that one side kind of comes in from the other, ben shenir mibachutz v'shav mibifnim, whether you can only tell that there is this, difference in width from the outside, but from the inside you can't tell. Uven shenir mibifnim, whether you can only tell from the inside, v'shav mibachutz, but from the outside you can't tell. Nidon mishum lechi tistayim. So it'll be treated as a lechi. So there you have it. Now, what are we talking about over here? So if you look at on 9b2, the bottom left, so the first example would be one where you could tell, alright, so mavui A at the bottom left. So mavui A would be where from inside the mavui you can't tell, but from looking from the outside you could tell that there's a difference there. And in example number 2, in mavui B, so from the inside you could see that this wall kind of juts out into the mavui, into the width of the mavui, but from the outside you can't tell that there's, it just looks like part of the wall. So in both of those cases, Rabbi Chia would say that it would be a good lechi. So we see that Rabbi Chia says that when it's near mi bachutz v'shav mi b'fnim, it would be considered a good lechi. Rabbi Yochanan, it's another Gemara asks, one second, but why is that a good enough reason to assume that Rabbi Chia holds that nir b'chutz v'shav mibifnim is a good lechi? Rabbi Yochanan milo shmiele ha? What, do you think Rabbi Yochanan didn't know about this brisa? Ela shmiele v'lo saverla. Of course Rabbi Yochanan knew about this brisa, but he just wasn't sure about the authenticity of this brisa, right? Random brisas, you never know if you can trust them or not, especially as we saw by Reb Zakkai earlier, who quoted a brisa and Rabbi Yochanan said, get out of here. So Rabbi Yochanan knew about this brisa that says that, if it's near mi b'fnim, v'shav mi b'chutz, or near mi b'chutz, v'shav mi b'fnim, it still works. But he didn't hold of it. He didn't think it was authentic. So Rabbi Chia nami lo savila. Rabbi Chia also, we can argue, knew of this brisa. He knew of the brisa, but didn't hold of it. But the Gemara says, "Hi, my." The Gemara says, "Do you really believe that?" I understand why we would say that Rabbi Yochanan doesn't hold of this brisa. That's why he didn't teach it, after all. But Ela Rabbi Chia, if it's true that Rabbi Chia didn't agree, didn't think that this was an accurate brisa, then why would he teach it? Right? The fact that he's teaching it must mean that he agrees with it. Now, what's also significant about Rabbi Chia specifically when it comes to brisas is because Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Hoshaya were the ones who edited the Toseftas. They were the ones who gathered all the brisas that were accurate and valid and organized them in the Tosefta, as we saw in Daf Kuf Chaf Aleph Mebez of Masechta Shabbos, that a brisa that was organized and vouched for by Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Hoshaya we can trust. If it wasn't, if it's just a random brisa, we can be skeptical about it. And therefore, if Rabbi Chia is sort of mentioning a brisa, we can assume that this is one of the brisas that he's vouching for, and therefore we can safely assume that it's Rabbi Chia who holds that nir b'chutz v'shav mibifnim would be a good lechi. Amar Rabba bar Rav Huna, nir mibachutz v'shav mibifnim nidon mishum lechi. So Rabba bar Rav Huna says that when you have a lechi that is visible from the outside, but flush on the inside, that you can't tell that it's there, so nidon mishum lechi, it is, you can treat it as a good lechi. Amar Rabba Musvina Nashmaitin. Now Rabba says that we can ask a kasha on this assertion of Rabba by Ravuna from the following Mishnah. Chatzar ktana shenifritza ligdola, right? We saw this yesterday. If you have a small chatzar that opens up into a larger chatzar, gidola muteris uktana asura, mepnei she'kipescha shel gidola. So you're allowed to carry in the larger chatzar. You're not allowed to carry in the smaller chatzar. V'im isa ktana nami tishtri b'nir mi b'chutz v'shav mi b'fnim. Now, if we say that nir mi b'chutz v'shav mi b'fnim works, well, then you should also be allowed to carry in the smaller one. Friends, what are we talking about? We talked about it a little bit yesterday. Well, not a little bit, a lot of it yesterday, but let's discuss this. So if you look on 9b2, on the right side, you could see this diagram. You have a larger mavuis, you have a larger chatzer, and it is attached to a smaller chatzer. Now, from the perspective of the larger chatzer, if you're standing in the larger chatzer, you could see that you have 3 complete walls, and then you have this fourth wall, right, that has these 2 sides, and then in between there is less than 10 amas. So it's fine. It's just a wall with a pesach in it. And therefore you can carry in the larger chatzar. No problem. However, the smaller chatzar, from when you're in the smaller chatzar, you can't see that there is these other, that this breach, that where the smaller chatzar opens up into the larger chatzar. When you're standing in the smaller chatzar, you have no clue that there's more wall on either side of the opening, and it just looks like a pirza, just looks like a breach, and it's completely open to the larger chatzar. And therefore, because it's completely open to the larger chatzar, you're not allowed to carry in the smaller chatzar, even though they did an Ayruvin chatzeris. Now the kasha is, why? If we say, like Reb Chia wants to argue, that nir mi b'chutz v'shav mi b'fnim is nidon kelechi, so then we can treat these outer parts of the wall, even though we can't see it from the inner chatzar, doesn't matter. It's still valid. And therefore we should consider this, where the smaller chatzar opens up to the larger chatzar, just to be a pesach and a larger wall. And you should be allowed to carry in the smaller chatzar. That is the Gemara's kasha. So Reb Zera, so says Reb Zera, is this the first time Reb Zera came up in Masechta Ayruvin? Maybe. Maybe not. Who can remember? So it's talking about where the walls of the little chatzar open up into the larger chatzar. So, what does that mean? So look at the bottom diagram on 9b2, all the way at the bottom right. So you can see that the walls of the smaller chatzar kind of extend into the larger chatzar. So they don't just end, right? So it's not just pashit nir mi b'chutz v'shavim mi b'fnim. It's not just talking about where from the outside you could see that there's this wall, but from the inside you can't tell. Because even from the even from the outside there's no extra wall over there, because the wall from the smaller chatzar extends into the outer chatzar, and therefore by where the wall ends, there really is it's not part of any larger wall. So v'lema lavud v'tishtri, but then the Gemara says, but why don't we say lavud? What about lavud? That the area between this wall from the small chatzar that's jutting into, right, that's extending into the larger chatzar, this wall is within 3 tfachim of the outer wall of the larger chatzar, and therefore we can consider it to be connected and closed off, and right, completely connected to the outer wall of the chatzar. And therefore, it's considered like there is that area is filled in, and it is considered like there is wall on either side of this wall that's extending from the smaller chatzar into the larger chatzar, and therefore we can once again apply our principle of nir mi b'chutz v'shavim mi b'fnim. Chitema demiflige tuva, and if you're going to say, yeah, but the walls of the smaller chatzar, when they extend into larger chatzar, are more than 3 tfachim away from, right, 3 tfachim or more, away from the outer walls of the larger chatzar. But Rav Ada bar Avimi kamed Reb Chanina ketana be'eser gdola b'chasasrei. But Rav Ada bar Avimi taught in front of Reb Chanina that in this case we're talking about where the larger chutzner was 11 amas wide, the smaller chutzner was 10 amas wide, which means that there was a difference of 1 amma in width. And if you assume that the smaller chutzner was centered with the was aligned in its center with the larger chutzner, then that means that there were 3 tfachim on either side of the smaller chutzner, of where the wall extends into the larger chutzner. And because the walls itself have their own width, so between the two walls is going to be less than 3 tfachim. So once again, we should say lavud. So Ravina b'muflagin mikosel zeh b'shnayim mikosel zeh b'daled. So says Ravina, yeah, it's true that the larger chutzner was 11 amas and the smaller chutzner was 10 amas, but they weren't aligned in the center. Rather, one side of the chutzner, where the walls of the smaller chutzner extended into the larger chutzner, on one side it was only 2 tfachim, so you would say lavud, but on the other side it was 4 tfachim, so you can't say lavud anymore. Friends, we're going to hold it here. I know it's a shtickle cliffhanger, but if we don't end it here, we got to go for quite a bit. So we'll save that fun for tomorrow. Friends, let's do a recap. At the beginning we talked about meshucha and tluya, because we brought it as a question on Rava, who had said that a korah must be above the mavui. Now, then we brought a kasha from this meshucha or tluya, which we wanted to say that meshucha is when the korah is on these pegs outside of the mavui, and the tluya is when it's inside of the mavui, but neither end of the korah reaches the walls of the mavui. So we're saying that in both cases, as long as it's within 3 tfachim, then it's kosher. So that means that even in this meshucha, when it's outside of the mavui, as long as it's within 3 tfachim, it's going to be a kosher korah. So we said, no, that's not what it's talking about. And we gave 2 different options for what meshucha and tluya is. The first one was that meshucha is when the korah is above the mavui, but it's coming in from one side and doesn't quite reach the other side. And so if there's less than 3 tfachim, it's kosher. If not, then not. Whereas tluya is when the same thing. It's when, neither side of the korah reaches the walls. Now Rav Ashi says it's actually talking about an L-shaped, right? Where you have this kind of L-shaped thing on top of the, like inverted L on top of the walls. And then you have the korah sort of nailed into that, and the korah is too thin to reach either side of the mavui, and it's also not exactly resting on the walls. And we could say that you could both lower it and extend it using lavud and what was that thing called? Chavot. Okay, then we got into Rabbi Yochanan's view about carrying in the area beside the lechi. Abai said that Rabbi Yochanan's view is that it's asur. Rava said Rabbi Yochanan's view is that it's mutter. Then we talked about a mavui that has multiple lechis. So we say that as long as the lechis are less than 4 tfachim but larger than 3 tfachim, well, then we get to the machlokas between Reb Shimon ben Gamliel and the Chacham. We have 2 ways of understanding that machlokas. Rav Huna Breder of Yoshua said it's talking about that the nafkamina is that if you say that these lechi, if you say lavud, then once you get to the innermost lechi, you got to stop carrying in the mavui, because you can't carry next to the lechi. Whereas the chachamim would say that since you don't say lavud, you can carry all the way up to the outer lechi, but you still wouldn't be able to carry next to the lechi. That's an nafkamina between Reb Shimon and the chacham, according to Rav Huna Breder of Yoshua. According to Rav Ashi, the nafkamina is that it's talking about when the lechis are within 4 tfachim of each other, larger than 3 tfachim, over the course of 4 amas. And therefore, because it's 4 amas, it actually creates its own mavui, right? So therefore, if you say lavud, then it's 4 amas, and it creates its own mavui, and it needs its own lechi now. If you'd say like the chum that it's not lavud, well then, there's no new mavui, you don't need any new lechi. And then that brought up another question about what happens when you have a lechi that's visible from the outside, but not from the inside. Rabbi Yochanan says that it's not a good lechi. Rabbi Chia says that it is a good lechi. Chevre, that was Daf Tes of Masechta Shabbos. I sure hope you enjoyed it. We got Daf Yud ahead of us tomorrow. Peace out.